this. Let me give 12 examples. Now, I'm not going to go through these. I'm just going to mention them. And then after this, I'll see what you want to say about this. Here's what I want to say to preface it. We're not saying that on every issue, the Protestants are in the right with respect to the patristic witness. Not true. Not true. It is messy. We're saying on the main issues, it's a matter of comparison. Okay, who's closer? And so some of the ones that Calvin mentions and that I think of a lot is, number one, the system of salvation with indulgences and the treasury of merit. The treasury of merit, the scholarship on that is very clear. That's a medieval idea. Transubstantiation as the particular mechanism for real presence. That's medieval. And you can see that in the turbulence of how it's developing in the early medieval era. Papal infallibility. That there are 7 sacraments particularly. You can find people talking about more than 2, but I don't know anybody who's saying there's 7 early on. The veneration of images. I'm doing work on that right now. I'm very convinced that's a late patristic accretion. Masses for the dead to reduce time in purgatory. Okay, I don't think that's representative of the earliest practices. Withholding communion in both kinds. Withholding scripture to the vernacular. Violence as justified by official church theology in magisterial teaching. The elaborate role of Mary in daily piety, legalism in monasteries, and the complete loss of rigor in church discipline. Okay, those are examples I would mention as what the reformers were saying. Look at these important issues, and the Roman Catholics are way further from the patristic testimony than the Protestants on those. So in case anyone's saying you don't have really, it's just a claim, you don't have specifics, like, no, there's a lot of things you can see that are mushrooming up in that medieval era. So I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. That's a really good list. I mean, that's very similar to the same list that I would probably give on these issues. I do a series going through the Augsburg Confession, which I've been doing for a while. And at this point, we've just kind of gotten into the abuses section, so the second half of the Augsburg Confession, which starts to get into specific medieval practices. So I've been exploring a bit of this recently and doing some reading, particularly on the issue of withholding the cup from the laity. I mean, and you brought that up as one of your points, but to me, that's so significant because here is an example of a practice that has no historical support. I mean, none. I mean, there is no father who allows for the cup being, withheld from laity. It just isn't there in the early church. But we also there have an example of a very clear scriptural command that is continual for the church being withheld or not. I mean, they're saying, Jesus said do this. The entire history of the church says do this. And at some point in the late medieval period, it's decided that the church shouldn't do this. So I think that among many other issues, they do become kind of the groundwork for a lot of the debates between the Protestants and Roman Catholics, say throughout the 17th century, as you get a lot of the more detailed scholastic work. You have Robert Bellarmine writing, and then you have guys like Johann Gerhard from the Lutheran side, or you have like a Francis Turretin writing for the Reformed side, or these various other theologians that are looking at the early church. And I think that really the historical work just made it clear that there were many practices in the medieval church that, and especially post-Trent, that just don't have patristic precedent at all. So what do you do with that?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can try to argue the sources teach those things anyway, which for a time I think people like Bellarmine did, and Bellarmine probably did as well as anybody could. But I think that's where you end up with the development hypothesis of Newman.
Yeah.
Because it's a way to say, well, it doesn't matter that the church didn't agree with us here because there had to be this development of doctrine. And in many ways, I feel like that, and that is kind of the standard go-to for Roman Catholic apologists today. And I think it kind of has to be. But in a way, that's kind of a capitulation to the Protestants being correct on these issues. Like it's kind of an admitting that, yeah, these things didn't exist in the early church.